Thank you, Chelsea. And thank you to the STC for having me in today. I love the audience. I should get a picture of you guys. This should be fun. So, how many of you are technical by nature? Woo! Yeah. Maybe I should ask another question. How many of you are non-technical? So let's talk about cybersecurity, but we're talking about it from a couple of different angles and perspectives. Some of this may help you have conversations talking to your business leaders about what's going on in the world and how should we be thinking about it and talking about it. Some of it is to help you think about how to better protect your businesses and the networks that you're responsible for. So I'm Jay Ryerse, and I'm VP of Global Security at ConnectWise, where we provide solutions to companies like Pearson-Kelly to help them to support and deliver their services out to their clients. So I don't think anything to sell you. We're not going to talk about buying a bunch of products today, which I'm sure you're glad to hear. And yet we've got some challenges, the things we have to solve for. So as Chelsea mentioned, yes, I came from an environment where I built a security company and we sold it off and I've stayed involved. But today, that same team that we built is 160 plus engineers strong, working in our 24/7 SOC worldwide. We've got an incident response team, we've got forensic teams, we've got our systems actually generate more than 56 billion events a day that our teams are analyzing. So when I'm giving you numbers and stats, I'm pulling it from the environments that we already have ourselves, where we're seeing what's working and what's happening. And we're seeing trends a little different than what you might get from a Talos or Sophos Labs or some of the other large enterprise research groups, because we're providing security support down to small businesses, typically 10 to 1,000 employees. And what we're seeing and what we've proven is that the attacks on businesses that size are different than what they're using to go after some of the biggest enterprises in the world. And so we're able to see these things and take proactive steps using our research team to actually protect small businesses around the world using that technology in those teams. So let's talk security. Since we're talking about what you can't see and don't see will hurt you, we should know what dwell time is. Does anybody here not know what dwell time is in cybersecurity? Okay, so dwell time is from the time the attacker entered a network to the time that you've identified them and they've been eradicated. Depending on who you listen to, that they say it's anywhere from 45 to 160 days that an attacker is in a network before they've been identified and removed. That may depend on what kind of business they're in. For example, ransomware. And we know ransomware attacks, it's about 45 days that they're in there. And how many of you knew that, and know how they determine what the ransom request is going to be? Anybody have any ideas?
Financial.
It's financial, but do you know how, when they say we want $1 million ransom, how did they get to that number?
Well, they know your financials. They get to them. That's what your insurance says.
That's true. Hopefully, they were not in your network 45 days, but if they were in 45 days, they probably saw your P&L statements, probably saw documents that you didn't want out there. They're also using tools like Zoom Info and others, same we would use if we were looking at businesses. They probably know more about the businesses that they're attacking than we realize once they've gained entry. But typically, the ransom payment is 10% of a company's revenue. That's the going rate that you'll hear from the insurance companies, and what we are seeing on a pretty consistent basis. Will they negotiate that ransom?
Yes.
When?
After you ask.
Sometimes after you ask, depends on what your business is. If they find out that you're a hospital or that a non-profit organization, they're more inclined to discount.
Right.
And if you're not, if you're evil corp, then they're not playing that game, right? That's just the reality of it. How many of you have been through or worked through a ransomware attack? Have actually seen one live or actually worked through it? Show of hands, up a little higher, guys, so we can all see it. Okay, so then there's always the haves and the have-nots, right? Because the rest of you will at some point. It's no longer a question of if, but when. Getting back to normal, like pre-attack, is about 64, 65 days. You actually get back to normal after a cyber attack happens. I can also tell you that most businesses, unlike fires and floods, do not go out of business after a cyber attack. But there's reputational harm, there's business harm to the business. We also see where employees in that company who knew that they were lax on cybersecurity felt like they were victims in the attack and they ended up leaving over the next 6 months. That's a stat that you don't hear about a lot, but we're seeing it time and time again. There's pending legislation around ransomware and cyber attacks. I'll talk about that here in a minute because as I was flying in this morning, I was literally reading what was passed on Tuesday in the Senate. I'll show you that here in just a second. Cyber insurance. First off, carriers are now saying, hey, we're not going to cover cyber for certain types of businesses where there's too much risk, especially in the smaller business space. They're raising premiums on renewals, and they're giving you major checklists you have to go through. How many of you have seen some of those checklists you have to solve for? Yeah. It's not like it used to be like, hey, do you have antivirus? Because those were the good days. But it's changed quite a bit. They want to know everything about your business, people, process, and of course technologies. And of course cyber warfare is in place. So those of you that have not been through a cyber attack, I know that you might feel like you live in this really nice neighborhood. It's clean, it's neat, there's no pollution, there's no crime, there's no traffic. The kids can stay out until the streetlights come on. Once you've been through it, you'll never let the kids out of the house again. Okay? It's a different world that we actually live in. Now, I talk about cyber warfare for a reason because we are literally on the precipice of a cyber world war like we probably haven't seen before. Our CISO of our company actually founded the security team at Homeland Security, which became CISO over time. So he's seeing and telling us things that will make you want to puke. It's not good. But here's what he has said. He said, we have seen reconnaissance, we have, of these actors, trying to figure out what they're going to do in the event of a cyber attack that goes global like that. But they haven't really attacked yet. They're holding on. They might have persistent threats already in place. We'll use those to launch against us. But until sanctions are imposed on Russia, which is what we would be doing, they're holding back. But they've come out and said, we will attack, and no holds barred. We'll go after critical infrastructure. So it could be road signs, stoplights, it could be financial services, it could be oil pipelines, it could be power grids, we don't really know. And I also can't talk about what we could do in reverse, because obviously we've got some pretty good people too. This right here is a list of all the known threat actor gangs or groups that are out there. In the last several weeks, they've been taking sides. Now, this image is a couple days old, but on the cybernode.medium.com, you can see literally where they've come out and said, hey, we're on the Russia side, hey, we're neutral, we're playing Switzerland, and hey, we're anti-Russia. And they're attacking each other already, we're seeing that. Okay, so it's going to happen if this thing escalates and continues. I mentioned pending regulation. I was flying in today and I was reading this. Literally, they're going to require businesses to report a cyber attack and report ransom payments within 72 hours. This will pass the House and get signed quickly. It'll probably take them 2 years to implement. But you'll see it will start with, again, that critical infrastructure. Power companies, nuclear power plants, oil manufacturing, healthcare, financial services. We'll all see the rules come at them much faster than a small business that does the local accounting for local businesses. But it's coming. We've got to know that. And they're going to hide it behind privacy. Like, you're going to see more and more requirements coming from the government where they're saying, hey, you're responsible for protecting the data you have and maintaining privacy for the content you have. To do that, you have to implement all these tools, all these controls. And they've been doing that for a while. This is actually not new. We just really haven't paid a lot of attention to it because it hasn't been forced on us like it's going to be. If I'm thinking about what I need for security today, I want visibility. I want to be able to detect an intruder as quickly as possible in an effort to reduce risk. Is that a fair statement? Reasonable? Because if I can find an intruder at minute 45 versus day 45, the risk to the business is substantially different. So the faster we can get visibility into the network, what's going on. Now, I'm not talking about IT infrastructure as much as what's happening on the wire that is malicious with malicious intent, the better off I'm going to be. So I'm looking at tools like EDR, XDR, SIM, to give me that visibility as an IT person to understand what's really happening and let those engines correlate the data and tell us when bad things are happening. That's the easy part. It's easy for me to say that, but I'm coming to you with the guidance that came from President Biden's executive order last year. How many of you have read this? A few of you? It came out within moments after Colonial Pipeline was hit. It's a 34-page document. It was written by really smart security people. It's well crafted. It's not an overreach. And regardless of your political stance here, it's a good document. What I like about it is that this is the first time the government here in the U.S. has said, these are the controls that you should have. And they came out and said, you need an incident response plan. You need to test it, you need to tabletop it, you need to really know that it's going to function in a cyber attack. You need multi-factor authentication on everything. You need EDR, MDR, XDR, I don't care what flavor of it, but you need the ability to see the more advanced threats. You need SIM. Sorry, there we go. You need backups. And backups are not just in the cloud or just local. They want you to go back to the model we used to use in IT, which was we had one offline. Once a week, once a month, you determine how often. You've got to have a copy that you literally take offline and do not connect to the network so that there is no way a cyber attack could impact it. Okay? Remember, we used to take tapes home, or the business owners took tapes home and put them in the safe at the bank or whatever. We're back there. And we should have been all along, but make sure that your environments have that now and you're thinking about that. It's going to require more storage, it's going to require more work, I get it. But that's your best chance of survivability of a cyber attack, is to have offline copies of your backups. Because when they break in, they're disrupting your backups too. If you don't test your backups very often, that's a problem. I don't mean you have a backup system, which is really cool, that every morning you get an email that shows all of your servers spun up. Right? You guys have those today? Where you're seeing that there's an image and the image was bootable? I love those. Until the attacker goes in and says, unchecked data folder 1, unchecked data folder 2, unchecked data folder 3, and nobody tested that the data you cared about was actually recoverable. So then you bring back the server and you realize the server had no data on it that was actually being backed up. Happens all the time. So that's why you should be testing your backups on a regular basis. What I mean by that is testing a restore of your backups. I'll also tell you that before you spend money on security, you should assess. Do a risk analysis, do a security assessment focused on the risk of security, where the data resides, who has access to it, how they access it, how often it's backed up, what those controls are in place. And do not trust that your cloud provider, Microsoft or Google, is actually backing up your data. You cannot trust that's happening. So many agreements out there, they actually exclude that so that it's your responsibility. And yet we think because it's in the cloud, it must be secure, it must be backed up. Right? Anybody have that problem right now? Thank you for admitting it.
Hey, I'm honest.
Yeah. Well, most people know it. They're like, I'm not raising my hand. He's going to call on me. But that's what happens. So, and look, I'm also not here to play, security cop. I understand that every single day of the week, you're heading towards the right security, whatever that is for your business, and that we'll all get to zero trust at some point. And the problem is that you deal with users. I mean, they find ways around tools. I know because I'm one. In our own business, my CISO was like, Jay, you're an ass. Like, what do they do now? He said, you haven't taken your awareness training. I teach this stuff. I know, but you got to take it to it. Okay, fine. At least you caught me and called me out. The fact that you caught me tells me you're paying attention. That's a good sign, right? But it's users that are going to always make this difficult. Users don't want to do 2FA, right? Users don't want to use VPN. Users want to be able to use any device, anywhere, anytime, connect any data. They don't understand the impact of this. And today, too bad. We have to get to a point where we no longer say it's acceptable to use and run unsecure environments. Is that fair?
No, because those are my tire tracks.
Chelsea took credit for that image. All right, so you want to build a security program, right? I talked about it being, people, process, and technology. This should not be new to anybody here. It's the same thing we deal with in regular IT, correct? But a security program requires that you get executive buy-in. Is that fair? Because if the executives are not buying into whatever you want to do, it's not happening. So I've got a really cool slide for you. We're going to show them what happens when you don't implement people, process, and technology. I have to read the slides so we turn away. So no people, process, technology, there's no defense, obviously. It doesn't happen. If you have just people, you have no ability to execute, because you can't do it at scale. How many of you are running a network with more than, let's say, 50 machines? Yeah, I mean, if you had the sneaker net, an update of every machine manually, you can never get it done. You've got to be able to automate these things. If you just got a process, it's a waste of effort. I mean, I've got all kinds of policies in place, but can we actually enforce them all? No, not without people and technology. So if you've got people and process, you can't scale. Right? Technology is all about doing more with less. If I've got people and technology, you are inconsistently delivering services. That makes it hard for you to manage a larger environment because you must be very consistent, very standardized to be able to operate efficiently. With just process and technology, the people aren't on board, including the executives, you get lousy adoption. So you have to have all three to be effective in rolling out your security program. Does that make sense? Will this help some of you talk to your executives and help them understand why you need to do more, buy some tools, and why you want to bring in help?
Can you come explain it to the executive?
Say again? It needs more crayon and animated characters.
We need crayons.
Crayons, that's what he said. It needs some crayons. So again, it helps you tell a story though, and that's what we've got to be able to do is get to our executives and get the right budget. Because every time you go say to them, hey, I need to go buy a new fancy red box to prevent that threat, they don't understand. They can't relate to it. So you've got to tie it back to policy and processes you have in place as part of a risk management, risk assessment approach to having that right conversation. So, we're going to give you guys this deck afterwards. I know that you're all smart. I know you've got good backgrounds. You're doing all the right things in your environment. These are the things that if I'm you and I'm thinking about what's happening in Ukraine right now and what this could do to our economy, these are the things that I would go do tomorrow to start making sure that if our company gets hit by attack, I'm not losing my position. Because cyber attacks are resume-changing events for IT people. In case you haven't figured that out. Usually they're the first to go and get the blame, even though it probably had nothing to do with anything you did wrong, as much as it was you didn't get the resources you need. Is that a fair statement? I don't want to hear you guys are having issues like that. I don't want anybody here having cyber attacks, but it happens. Matter of fact, when I left this morning around lunchtime till now, the odds are 2 Springfield businesses have fallen victim to a ransomware attack. Think about that. 2. Which 2? Hopefully none of you. You'll get a call an hour from now. All right, so as part of this conversation, we wanted to make it not just me talking to you and having a conversation, but I asked Tyler, and against his will, Chelsea made him come up and actually have a conversation with us. Step that way. There you go. So we're going to talk about some of the things we're seeing with the attacks and what it might look like. So Tyler, up.
Thank you. James is putting the table out for me there. But
We got Victor. Woo! Easy now.
Hard topic to
look at that. Yeah, I only agreed to this because there was free alcohol, so I'm glad to see that we're actually making it.
So Tyler, tell me about you first.
Yeah, so as Chelsea kind of talked about, I spent 12 years in healthcare. Started out kind of doing help desk there, and I worked all the way up to being director and basically being the HIPAA security officer and running, building cybersecurity programs too. And then I found that that wasn't punishment enough, so I decided to join MSP and bring some of those skills and experiences to SMBs around Springfield.
Thanks. Cheers.
Yeah.
Oh.
Even confidence.
Yeah, can't go solo here, come on.
Okay, so we're going to run through some scenarios, and some may resemble real life incidents because we've seen them and heard them, but they're always a little different. And it's not meant to say that, hey, your company got hit by an attack today, we're going to talk about it or not. We're going to stay at a high level, stay vague enough to understand what's going on, some of the things you should think about when attacks happen, kind of walk through what we might think about in that particular case from a cybersecurity perspective. Fair? Okay, so we're going to start with an email compromise. Business email compromise from the FBI makes up half of all the attacks happening out there right now. Users clicking on emails. I think the number of 2020 was the average business email compromise was a $94,000 loss. Okay, so this is wired out money. Whatever happened, it was a $94,000 hit to the business. That's on the reported claims. How many of you, if you are not required to by law, would call the FBI after a cyber attack? That's the problem. There's probably a lot more. There's probably a much higher number, but 94 is enough to get most business owners and business attention, plus the reputational impact. So when we're thinking about business email compromise, what are you thinking about?
I mean, when I think about business email compromise, how many people here have had that user that swears they didn't click on the link, but we all know that? That's generally what comes up when I think of this. And generally it comes around user education on trying to do things like security awareness training, trying to educate them on how best to navigate things like don't click on the link. But if you do, when you call, how do you handle it? What's your kind of next steps? Because we all know that first call they make, they are always in the right, they did no wrong, and it's definitely the computer's fault, and then we get the real truth later on. That's what I'm thinking, kind of when I go through it. But when I read through this scenario, the first thought that I kind of came to was, it looked like the user logged in, there was no MFA prompt. It looked like they were not using any multi-factor authentication. And in today's landscape, multi-factor authentication is just a paramount thing. You absolutely have to implement it. And to your point about the cyber insurance carriers, it's a non-negotiable for them now as well.
Yeah, and we can get technical in things you could be doing, and I know that business leaders are going to tell you, hey, just block it before whatever comes in. Well, that sounds great, but when company A down the street got compromised, and they're a vendor of yours, or a client of yours, and they sent your team an email that came from their systems, there's no way to know how to block that. Sure, you can turn on link checking, you can turn on other things you can do, but at the end of the day, users are going to click emails that they recognize the sender, attachment or not. The other one that we see quite a bit, and I don't have a good answer for, is social media. We'll see an HR or a recruiter type of person receives a LinkedIn message that says, hey, Tyler, I saw that application you got for a new IT position at your company, and I've got 5 years experience, I've worked in the MSP space before, and I'd love to come learn more about the company, and I've gone ahead and included a link to my resume here. When HR clicks on that, it never came through any email filters. They were socially engineered into clicking the resume. Or accounting firms, right? People clicking on invoices all the time.
Or we have the occasional person who's not in HR or accounting that receives that payroll email and just can't resist opening it because they know they probably are not in payroll or accounting, but there might be something, there's a good gossip in there. There might be something worthwhile checking out.
I think the threat actors out there know when our teams get their sales commissions. Because our sales team starts getting emails with commission statements. And they don't look twice. And then they get locked out of the network. They don't know why.
So what I'm hearing you say is that it's sales' fault. Jay, is that where we're?
It's a sales lead, man, it's a lead.
I think people are going to say you should have blocked it.
Well, that's true. Yeah, it's never sales' fault. I've learned that.
And the education, the knowledge, I know that you've seen these and heard these things. What other examples do you guys have? You know, I gave you LinkedIn to HR, give you the accounting and invoices getting done. What other areas are you seeing attacks? Because if we don't start working on this problem together, it's not going to go away. I mean, at the end of the day, cybersecurity is a team sport, right? It's going to take all of Springfield working on this together. So what are other scenarios you've seen and heard?
Masquerading as IT to the end user.
Masquerading as IT to the user.
Just by kind of show of hands, on the slide we also have a little permissions screen up there. How many people or organizations that you know of block the ability for a user to approve an app when it's requested in 365? You get a little pop-up, maybe it's Calendly or one of those, and it says, hey, you want to approve this on behalf of your organization. Do you allow, by show of hands, your users to approve that, or do you know if you block it? Block it?
It depends on the app.
So what we've kind of seen in Microsoft has led into this is that now threat actors are using custom apps that are unverified to phish people, get them to click on that, and they don't need your creds now. Once you've given them access, you can just start reading their emails because a user was allowed to approve that application.
How many of you are using Office 365 for your email system? What's everybody else using?
Don't say Exchange.
So,
Google and Microsoft, those are the only options.
Any Google G Suite you might think?
anybody got some homegrown tools you're using or using Exchange on-premise still? Are you willing to admit to it?
Yeah, that's the key. There's
What? AOL.
AOL.
That explains a lot.
You still have a secret. Can you do that for us? Yes, exactly.
So, some of the things that you need, talk about visibility briefly before. How would you know if somebody logged into the Office portal from Russia? Picking on Russia today.
Conditional access policies.
If it works.
If you
Yeah, well.
Maybe another question to that is, how many of you have the capacity and time to be able to watch those logs and make sure that you can detect them?
Solid is. Solid question.
that's all you do though, right?
One person
It's all one hand and back. All you do is look at logs, right?
all day long?
No, we have a special firewall that's a one-to-one, one request, one log. We have a unified log. It's real easy. So in the case of what you asked, it'll show up as a .ru. It's a immediate red flag.
Do you have those logs, do they kind of go to like a event management software anywhere, or is it just itself?
We have them available in the dashboard.
Nice.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, logging is a huge part of this, right? I mean, finding these things and being able to determine it requires logs. Without logs, it's a huge piece.
How about the impossible travel? Do you guys have any problems with that? Where you've got a user logs in maybe from their home, legitimately, then they come off the VPN and they connect back in, and it flags them as logged in to different locations in a short period of time. They see those and people those kinds of issues?
Yep.
Yeah, I was in London. I was in our office in London, and we kept having internet issues. So I kept jumping to my hotspot with VPN. The team kept calling me saying, "Why do you keep jumping between a US IP and a London IP?" I said, "Because you can't keep the network up." They like the answer, but if that's what we deal with, we have to see. So you've got to find ways to sort through those issues. Again, you want visibility. You want it, whether it's a firewall connection or tools, you need to be able to see what's going on inside those office environments. How many of you use secure score for Microsoft. I know you know what secure score is.
Elaborate.
For 365.
So Microsoft has a separate site you go to. You can log in with your credentials into your tenant, and it will give you a report card on security on your tenant.
Okay.
I know you did not know that. Okay, so you should all be going there tomorrow. Add that to my list of other things to do tomorrow, make it 12. You can go look at your 365 secure score. You can Google it, you can go find it. It's pretty easy. But you're not going to like the results the first time you look. And they don't make it easy to fix the things that are wrong. But if you think about moving from on-prem Exchange to 365 in the cloud, all we've really done is move from your servers to theirs, right? You still have to configure them and secure them. You've got to put the right controls in place to lock them down. But no one ever really talked about how to do that. Microsoft has not done a great job of training us on how to keep their stuff secure. So instead they gave us a report card, they link you to all the KP articles. At least it's a start. So again, you should be doing that and check your tenants. If you don't have them already reporting into SIEM or to other solutions, it allow you to do management of firewalls.
Has anybody in this special seen the Microsoft shared responsibility model, where they kind of say what they expect you as the user to be responsible for and what they believe they're responsible for? Also an interesting thing to check out, to kind of just take a look at to see where you should be kind of reacting. Because there's times we assume that because it's in the cloud, that Microsoft or the cloud provider is taking care of it, and that model is a great example of showing you where you need to start reacting and where your responsibilities overlap with the cloud provider.
So any questions about email systems and email compromise that we should dive into?
Not much of per se. I should bring up that Office 365 does have basic like email security campaigns that you can launch from within Office 365.
Yep. And you'll start to see more and more of those tools become standard at the different license levels, because they have to do something. I hate to say this, is there anybody here from Microsoft?
We should ask that first.
Before I get myself in trouble, because we are recording this, it's a fascinating concept. If you think back to 2003, I believe it was, Microsoft said that they'd become one of the largest security players in the world. And we all laughed. And yet, in the last 5 years, we've done a really good job of rolling out some great tools, right? And adding these types of features like Secure Score. And yet, they're still the most compromised product in the market.
Because everyone's using it.
Yeah, it's that user capability versus all in on security. So it's going to be tough. It's not that easy for them. They probably have the hardest line to walk because we want to trust them. We need them to do good. I mean, the reality is most of us in this room, myself included, have careers because of Microsoft. And I'm willing to acknowledge that. I mean, my first certification was Windows Server NT 4.0, Exchange 5.5. I'm old. But they're also the bane of my existence at times, right? Because they make my life difficult when it comes to security things. They've come so far, and yet we still got to keep watching. You need other tools. You need firewalls that can watch for you. You need SIEM. You need EDR. Other capabilities to make sure that you're protecting the keys to your most important data you care about. It usually starts with the executive's email. So again, business email compromise is a big deal for all of us. We should not treat it lightly, even though we like to. Oh yeah, we got to cover it, it's easy, but it's not. It's still half of the attacks out there.
I got a question. So, Tyler, you're speaking on, most of that, we'll say the hundreds of pages, maybe what you click to say I acknowledge or whatever for the actual product or service that you have, is how often are you seeing companies say, well, Microsoft had me covered, but then when you have to tell them a reality that, well, in the agreement that you actually acknowledge, that's on you, right? So.
Yeah, and typically where this comes up is it's very rarely ever when they're just kind of, they're not asking out of just proactiveness, right? It's because something's happened, right? And now it's a sense of urgency. We do see that. But we are very, more often than not, very click happy for lack of better words. You know, we see those agreements all over the place. We see them so often. We just kind of accept them, and this is a great example of that where it doesn't seem alarming. There's no red X's. There's no like warning and danger signs, and so it's just a blue accept box. We don't really see the content. You know, it's a barrier to what we're trying to get to. So we just say yes. And training certainly helps on the end user front, but I feel like it has to be layered with security as well. You know, if you're someone who is in a different part of the organization, you shouldn't be accepting that. You shouldn't have the ability to accept it. It needs to go through an approval process. It's not that we don't trust the end users, but we know that they can fall prey to these things.
We don't trust them.
We don't trust them. He's right.
You know, you carry this conversation into mobile devices, right? How many companies here spend money securing BYOD?
How many people have BYOD devices in their organization today?
Yeah, I've got one. So my phone, and this annoys me. I went to a Tampa Bay Lightning game the other night. I'm a hockey fan, and the tickets came in via Ticketmaster, and I went to hit the button to download these new digital tickets where it's a QR code, but it's 2 parts. And it rotates back and forth so that it's a little more secure than people just sharing out the QR codes to get into the ticket. And I do a download to the wallet on the iPhone, my personal phone, but I've got a company email on here in my calendar. They can't download it. They can't download the QR code. Our company has locked down our devices so hard that I couldn't even download the QR code for a ticket that I bought on my own phone. Now, we're having words over it. And I wasn't the only person impacted. Thank goodness our chief revenue officer and our CEO had the same problem. I'm like, okay, good, this will get fixed. Even though it's probably a really good policy, right? So you're balancing security versus convenience. And that's tough, right? Because your users don't want to log in 19 times a day or have 2FA or whatever else. They want to just click and go. I think we'll get there with the password lists and the technologies that we're seeing coming out already. It will get easier, but it's still going to be a challenge for all of us because it requires more people, more talent to manage these types of controls inside of the enterprise. So let's go to ransomware. So I gave you an example already of one that was extortion, but not ransomware. We are also seeing false flags. This is what our biggest fear is. If we go to cyber war, is that users are going to get prompted that there's a ransomware attack happening, but the attackers have already deleted the data. They've actually wiped it. So you'll hear about Hermetic Wiper and other attacks out there that look like ransom attacks, but before you start assuming it's ransom, go look at the file sizes, and if they're all 0 bytes, you know that there's something wrong. Don't pay that ransom. You won't get them back. So these are things that we're seeing there, but for most small businesses, it's going to happen. You're going to experience this at some point, unless you have all the controls and you're required to meet certain obligations. Banks don't see ransom attacks as much as local accounting firms, financial service companies. We shouldn't be seeing them at all, but we still do for a variety of reasons. So when a ransomware attack happens, you've been involved in some and so have I. From an incident response perspective, what are you thinking about walking into it?
I mean, when a ransomware attack happens, it can be very chaotic, of course, because you're trying to kind of prove these things, you're trying to determine what has happened. Generally, what our initial response is always is to take those machines off the network. Take the network, remove an uplink from the switch, do what you got to do to contain any spread of the ransomware. It's very important at this stage, especially when we start talking about cyber insurance and incident response firms that are going to come in, that we don't try to reboot a machine or do something that could potentially lose evidence from the ransomware to determine what has happened. Most of the ransomware events that happen today, it stays in RAM. They're counting on you to call the help desk and say, I don't know, go ahead and reboot it, and then you lose vital information that you need. So when we see an event like this, the first thing we're trying to do is move into containment, trying to prevent it to spread, and then usually working with, in most cases, insurance, legal, people like that to determine the best case forward. And of course, we all have pristine backups that are tested, that are good, so we don't have to worry about that.
So if I'm if I'm ready here, if you've never been through a ransomware attack, even if you have, if you're on site and something bad happens, right? You know, because bad things happen to good people all the time in cybersecurity. From a containment perspective, there's a couple of things that I would do quickly if I'm in charge of our network. I'm going to disconnect the internet connection. Not pulling the power out of the firewall, but I'm breaking that uplink port from the firewall or the router out to the network side. There's no longer an outsider in the environment. And I hate to tell you that I do that by going through my CISSP class, but I actually learned that from the FBI. I lived in Atlanta for many years, and one of the first major attacks in that market was Athens Orthopedic. It's a large ortho firm out in Athens, Georgia, where the University of Georgia is. And the FBI walked in with a search warrant because they assumed that the attack that they found was an insider threat. What they found were 205,000 patient records, all day, everything about it. And so they got the owners and said, we're here because you fall into a cyber attack, we found all this data. Where is your incident response plan? They didn't have one. So they literally got up and they walked over and said, okay, here's the closet, and they reached in and they unplugged the data cable from the wall and said, okay, the attacker is no longer in the building. Now, we want to sit down and talk to every employee. You could have your patients leave. They had no plan. I'll tell you the worst thing they did is because the patients were leaving and they were on social media talking about it already, they sent a practice manager out to go talk to the press who already showed up at the door. And the practice manager had no experience in crisis management, didn't know what to do, what to say, how to say it, what not to say, and they just, everything you should never say got said. And the press for weeks just harassed them badly. In the end, it turns out that the breach, I learned this a little while later from the company that it happened to, was their medical transcription company. Had a VPN connection into their network, they were compromised, and the data was exfiltrated out through their network, where you'd expect to see data records flowing, and out to the dark web, and that's how they caught them. And we see this time and time again. So unplug the internet connection. If you don't have tools that allow you to disconnect a workstation, like Sentinel-1 that allows you to take a machine offline and still work on it, not rebooting it, then pull the power to your switches. So there can be no more lateral traffic. So now you've contained not only any outsiders who are no longer in the network, now you've stopped any lateral movement and any additional ransom or encryption that won't occur between machines. Then you're calling your attorney, your insurance company, your service providers to help with these kinds of things, whatever else you need. And you're going to head quickly into a crisis management situation where you have to remind the employees of the business what the rules of discussion are around confidential information. Because this outage is just that right now. We don't know what it is, even though we probably would know. And so you're going to quickly take those actions and then follow whatever else is in your incident response plan.
If I come to show of hands, how many have heard the phrase assume compromise? When I read through this scenario and kind of looked through it, the first thing that kind of came to mind is we focused immediately on containment and dealing with the ransomware, which of course is where we want to be. But what we see in this event is that the attacker potentially got in through a vulnerability in the firewall that was unpatched. Kind of by a show of hands, how many people here do continuous vulnerability scanning within their networks?
More hands than I expected. Not many, but more. It's good.
Well, what do you mean by continuous? Weekly, monthly?
Yeah, I mean, you can still do it periodically. Something that just runs on a regular basis in an automated fashion and does vulnerability scanning across your network. So continuous would kind of come into if I came in and plugged a device into your network, how long would it take for that vulnerability scanner to show up? We want something that's going to scan it pretty fast and continuously so that we can see those things and we don't have a gap. And the reason behind that is because in this scenario, we kind of get into the situation of talking about patch management and doing patches. everyone begins to focus, kind of picking on Microsoft because we know they're not in the room now, at applying patches and making sure Microsoft is patched, or in some cases not applying a patch that Microsoft has released. But we don't always focus on infrastructure devices like, switches, firewalls, and they can be a source of that. Something where continuous vulnerability scanning helps you kind of plan for that, or at least see. It's another step in the layer of security, but just kind of interested to see how the adoption is on seeing that, because there's always not many tools to patch things like switches and firewalls.
I had a very similar FBI conversation last week where the agent involved and the company involved, I knew both of them. And they called me and said, hey, we have had WatchGuard firewalls. We fell victim to that vulnerability that was out there. So we have 21 locations now that we're scrambling. And it boiled down to, they had a really good patch process for software. And there are Windows and Mac devices, keep those current, never had the hardware accounted for. So make sure that those are a part of our process, which we talked about. It's interesting what happens when you get instant response, especially when you're coming into an environment you don't control, you don't own. And you get to see how it was set up, how it was designed, and why people made decisions they made. I can tell you on my list of things to do is to go make sure that you have no web management interfaces facing the web. So if you want to manage your firewalls remotely, connect into the network and then back to the firewall management. Don't open up a secure connection to that WatchGuard firewall, because now the attacker, even if they can't get into it, they now know you have WatchGuard. You've given them one piece of information that they can use, against you in their reconnaissance steps to determine how they're going to attack. So we see that a lot. One scenario I was in, actually the very first one I went into after I earned my CISSP, a law firm in the Atlanta area was hit by 140, 150 users. They were hit by a ransomware attack the Friday night before Christmas. Christmas that year was on Sunday, so we know that attackers like holiday and long weekends. We actually had Sentinel-1 deployed on 4 servers in the network. And then they were in a POC, they were testing it. And at 11:55, our SOC saw the alerts. We contacted them via phone and said, you're under attack. Here's what they're trying to launch, here's what's going on. And the IT person said, well, it's a holiday weekend, I'll do it on Monday. So if you understand what we're telling you, this was not going to end well. Jay, we're okay. The next morning, a couple of attorneys had gone into work because it was heading towards the end of the year. They had some contracts to get out. They couldn't see their data. 43 servers down, 89 of the 140 workstations were hit. He calls me on Tuesday and says, okay, so we brought in incident response offer, we brought in Baker Hostetler, we brought in CrowdStrike, they brought in, insurance company taking care of all this. But CrowdStrike doesn't want to send anybody on site over a holiday. He's like, can you guys help us with the incident response and getting hands-on? Like, sure, I'd love that. That's good money, incident response. And at the time, we were still starting the business, we were trying to get it running, and so we get there. This is 4 days later. Okay, the only 4 servers that were not hit before that had Sentinel-1. And they walk in, and their IT team and their service provider were sitting there in the computer room on their phones. I'm like, what are you guys doing? Oh, well, we're waiting for you to get here. What have you done the last 4 days? Well, they brought CrowdStrike in, and CrowdStrike gave us this really cool list of things to do, but we don't know how to do this. It's outside of our scope. We're really good at managing firewalls and patching servers and setting up workstations. But pulling disk images for forensics is not our swim lane. We're not good at that. So what have you done? Nothing. Okay, go home. Talk tomorrow. We don't need you here. We've got a lot of work to do and you're going to get in the way. And that's what we're going to experience. And to see these attorneys, the managing directors, and even just their staff attorneys, and even the rest of their staff, they were mortified. They were a top 15 or top 10 law firm in Metro Atlanta, and they knew that their reputation would be impacted by this. So the good news is they'd already gone through the conversations with their teams around what you can and can't say. So that didn't work too well. So why? I pulled up a Facebook page, said because it's out there. And the lawyers on the phone were like, what are you talking about? Send me the page. And of course they had to take it down quickly, but yeah, it was done. People were talking about it. And so again, you don't want to be on that side of it. So telling the story, sharing this information with your leadership teams to get the budget you need may require help. Have you ever been in a scenario where you were making a recommendation for a best practice that you wanted to do, and leadership said, I don't know about that. Then you're bringing a consultant company, somebody from the outside, who makes the exact same recommendation. They're like, yes, do that. That's what I want.
Saying the same exact words that I've used.
Yeah, exact same
phrase. I'm like, I don't, is it any language? I don't understand. Yeah, for sure.
So that's ransomware. Let's go on to insider threats.
So when I read through this scenario and got to kind of digest this, had a little bit of probably PTSD flashback from my healthcare days a bit. But in this scenario, obviously someone, an executive and the organization is maybe looking to cover the tracks a little bit. Maybe they did something that they felt was, didn't want the IT team to see. And they didn't have the technical knowledge, so they reached out to some resources online that were obviously very upstanding, not shady, even though the site was, I think, shady actors is what we would label it. And they said, yeah, we'll help you, absolutely. So in this scenario, when we look through it, it is absolutely an insider threat. The person is not, the executive here is not looking to take down the business for their own purposes. They're just trying to maybe they did something they didn't want to, and they're trying to kind of cover the bases. And in doing so, reach out to a group or someone who is obviously got other ulterior motives whenever they start to get into the network. One of the things that came to mind whenever I started reading through this and thinking is that if this is an executive, what were they executive? What do they have access to? Kind of by a show of hands, how many people here have implemented a security policy or implemented some form of security rule, and then shortly afterwards, an executive or someone from the leadership team said, "Can you exempt me from it?" Right? And you're like, "But you're the ones that I need to protect the most." And like, we understand that. Please go ahead and I don't want any restrictions. Restrict everyone else. I've seen those, and by the same token, there are also a lot of times the people who will say, "I must have access to everything," and you'll say, "Well, I don't think it's everything, everything, right?" I mean, 100%, you got to have access to all things. When we start to talk about things like ransomware, or in this case, letting someone in, we kind of come to the role-based access control. You're an executive for the organization, but you probably don't need access to all HR payroll data. You don't need access to all these other things. Building in things like access control lists, or specifying what truly is a role in the organization, and then holding them to it, even whenever it comes down to being someone like an executive, because we all know they take security very seriously until it is a convenience to them, or inconvenience to them. And then all of a sudden it's severe. But Jay, you ever experienced anything like this before?
Never. This never happens anywhere, right? But we also see employees who didn't get a good review, or didn't get a raise they were expecting, or whatever else. And then all of a sudden, there's a USB drive stuck in a device, and you see them copying off data. How many of you would even see that, would know that's happening? Do you have tools in place to see if that's happening, or have you just blocked all USB devices? Because using SIM and file integrity monitoring, you can start seeing those kinds of transactions and say, hey, this person should not be copying off the sales contact list. Maybe we need to go take a little closer look, understand what happened.
Out of curiosity, how many people here use a SIM or log management product, a central log management product for all their logs? Chelsea, did you raise your hand? Okay.
Did you lie?
No, absolutely not. I would never lie.
Trust but verify, Chelsea.
Exactly.
Trust but verify.
I thought she was taking credit for it. That's why I was like, what? But do you believe, for those that haven't raised your hand, that you have captured 100% of all systems that generate logs in your product? Okay.
No.
Why is that? Just out of curiosity. I mean, is it
Volume?
the volume? I'm sure we've all been familiar with the product where they kind of charge you by transaction or record, and then they ask you to determine how many records you think that's going to be, which is an incalculable thing, obviously, for sure. But that's the logging piece of this is, I think, very critical and key whenever it comes to something like insider threat, especially if you're doing an instant response, because this looks like legitimate traffic. It's going to look like a normal user. It's not, necessarily a shady person. It's that user's credential. Trying to kind of come back to that, I think, is can be very challenging, and that correlation helps.
Business executives tend to trust people, and they don't think that bad things can happen with their colleagues and their team. But we kind of know better. Human nature is that somebody is going to try to do something that they shouldn't be doing, and then you're going to be expected to report on that, document that it occurred, maybe in a legal case after the fact. You just don't know. So getting visibility, and then seeing those logs and being able to research and search for that type of data will become more and more valuable over the next several years. What's the first thing that a business leader asks after a cyber attack? What's the first question? How did it happen? They want to know who to attribute the problem to. But that's not the right question. And yet that's one you'll always get first. Then they're going to ask, what did they get? And then it's why did their tools solve these problems?
Whose fault was it?
Yeah, whose fault was it? And then, oh my gosh, we're in trouble. That's the 5 stages of grief for a cyber attack. It's always the same questions, and they're always in the same order. It's kind of sickening. We did one with a local county government, and it's in the press, so I can talk about it. It's Dawson County, Georgia, which is where we first built our SOC outside of Atlanta. A month after the city of Atlanta got hit by the attack, that cost them $20 million. Everybody kind of heard that in the press for a while. Dawsonville got hit. Dawsonville is 45 miles north of Atlanta. When you pass through Dawsonville, you're at Springer Mountain, which is the beginning of the Appalachian Trail. It's just all mountains. There's just nothing there. And our office, our SOC, was like 11 minutes to the courthouse where their IT infrastructure was. And they're not a client, but I knew the people, and they're like, hey, we got a problem. Can you come help? Yeah, we grabbed a couple of our guys, and we went straight there. I mean, we did not pass go, did not collect $200, didn't stop for lunch, we went straight there. As I'm pulling in and I'm walking in, the press from Atlanta was already there. Like, okay, maybe they weren't in Atlanta at the time, but 3 trucks pulled up, and they were like, hey Jay, what's going on? I'm like, what are you talking about? So when we heard something's going on here, I'm a citizen in this county. I'm just coming in to take care of some business, property taxes, that kind of stuff. They're like, yeah, whatever. They said we heard that there was a cyber attack. I don't know anything about that. There might be an outage, but I'm sure when I get in, they'll tell me all about it. So maybe we'll talk later. It was bad. Secret Service is there, and so they've got an IT team that's really good. The emergency services, 911, and police and fire and ambulance services were not impacted. They were on a separate segment. They didn't get breached. Everything's down. Servers are all encrypted. All their locations, from the gymnasiums to everything else in the county were impacted. So our team starts looking at what's going on, and we're surveying and inventorying what's in the server room. And they had 2 servers that were in the rack that were unplugged and no data cable. Like, what are these? Oh, those are our old servers. We didn't have budget to dispose of them. So we just kept them in the rack, figuring that the safest place for them would be in the same building as the police department. Like, I agree, that's a good call. What's on them? Oh, it's 2-year-old data. You didn't wipe them? No. Okay, that's good. You have a place to start. Because, oh yeah, their backups were a real-time sync to a hot site. It really wasn't backups. It was just a real-time sync so that if they lost this building, they could spin up somewhere else and be operational. So when one encrypted, everything encrypted. So our team started pulling out good data, comparing it to encrypted data, and we realized that, okay, there's something going on here. We don't quite know what it is, but with the help of, at the time, Malwarebytes, and a couple of the larger database companies, we were able to start looking at the encryption, and it was a kit. So we bought a ransomware as a service kit. And at the time, it was actually symmetrical encryption. So in about 6 hours, we were able to decipher and build a decryption key that was right within one character. All we had to do was test the one character, figure out which one worked, and we were able to figure it out pretty quick. At that point, the Secret Service didn't do anything. They were just taking notes, checking IDs and stuff. They're like, can you share that with us? Absolutely, I'm not going to hold it back. So we started decrypting and said, please get the logs first. So we started decrypting, looking at what was going on. We realized that the attackers had created, we found which user account it was. It was the tech support account for their accounting system. Okay? Which had full admin rights, and they came in via RDP, a secure RDP connection, but they had full rights, so that was it. And at that point, he said, thank you, and he left. What do we do? So the next day, we're decrypting, and when we're solving issues, we're looking at things, we're still interacting with the threat actors as if we didn't recover the files. Because if you had to pay, you didn't be prepared to. They'd already put $100,000 into an account to go and open the Bitcoin transaction, start that if we needed to, which thankfully they didn't need to do because we were able to decrypt everything but some historical data. But in the process, we found that the attacker, we found the account, but that account created a new user account that launched the attack. That user account was called System 32. Think about that. If you're not technical, System 32 is the Windows directory that all bad things happened. Okay? So they named a user after that, so if you were looking through logs, you might miss the fact that that was a user, not a directory. It's really good. At that point, when we knew that we were in good shape, we were able to bring them back online. It seems obvious, but it's not to IT people. We don't think about these things. You know, we're in the same pool together, but we're in different swim lanes. IT people have a very unique focus in the to keep systems up, keep them operational, keep users functioning, you know, build scale with technology, and they don't look at things with the same lens that a security person does. So we can look at the same network and have two very different outcomes in the conversation based on what we're seeing. It doesn't mean that the IT person's wrong or that we're right, or vice versa, but usually we're right. We know what shouldn't do.
Security is very good.
Yeah, it's how it works. So that's my insider threat story because, so how many of you have third parties that come into your networks to manage things? You're required 2FA. Do you source the IP addresses? Do you put whatever controls you can in place to hold them accountable? Are you asking them for their SOC 2 report or their latest security scan to see what they're doing and what their kind of concerns they can introduce into your network? The one that scares me the most are camera vendors and access control vendors. Their intentions are good, but they want to be able to use RDP to manage their device on site. We can't let them do that. We have to say no to RDP and put better controls in place so that they can't become the cause of the threat. The other one, that more of those, then that's kind of makes me very nervous. A business was hit. We're looking at all the logs. They had backups. They had Sentinel-1. Everything got restored back. They're up and running within an hour. Great. That's the way it's supposed to be. An hour later, they were down again. Bring it back up, start looking closer. What did we miss the first time? And we had asked them, show us the IP addresses of all the RDP connections you have open. It's coming in somewhere. We don't allow RDP on our network. Okay, can you show me the firewall? Can I log in and take a look? Oh, what's this? Port 3399 mapped to this source IP address. What's the IP address? Oh, that's our bookkeeper. She RDP's in.
Don't use it though.
So we call the bookkeeper, and we log into her machine, and she's got 25 accounts that she does bookkeeping for, 25 RDP credentials cached. Guess how many other businesses got hit by a ransomware attack that same day? 25. Of course, she was mortified. She didn't know any better. I thought she was doing right by her clients. So we have to make sure we apply a security lens to anybody that connects into our network. So if it's a contractor for a day plugging into the network, what can they and can't they see? Someone plugged me into the back of a VoIP phone. What can that user see? You don't think about those things. You know, do you leave jacks turned on, or you turn off all ports? They're not being used, so you can control access. Little things make a big difference when it comes to secure an environment.
Jay, 2 questions.
2 questions.
That's at the end.
Nope. I hosted this, so I get to inject.
Wow, good flex there.
I don't get to do it at home, so here. So, who here knows what Sentinel-1 is the first question, and then defining what Sentinel-1 is would be my second question.
Sure. So Sentinel-1 is an EDR company. They're one of the enterprise that they're leaders.
First question was who here knows what?
Okay, who knows what Sentinel-1 is? Quite a few of you. That's good.
PK, please.
Yeah, PK can put your hands down.
So if you don't know what Sentinel-1 is, then they're one of the major EDR providers, endpoint detection and response. It's far beyond your legacy antivirus tools today. You can use AI, use machine learning, use behavioral knowledge to help defend machines. Their claim to fame is they own the patent on being able to roll back a ransomware attack. They do it by protecting the Windows shadow copies. Really slick tool, really good at what they do. They're a Gartner Magic Quadrant leader. They've got, I think, 4 of the top 10, Fortune 10 companies as clients. And so we've worked with them for many, many, many years because of their capabilities. Again, the ability to roll back a ransomware attack is fantastic on really bad days, but also the ability to auto-remediate. So if you guys have a machine that's infected today with typical antivirus or tools that don't have auto-remediate, best practice is to take the machine offline and rebuild it and start from scratch. But techs, engineers, like to tinker. So we want to go in and see if we can make the registry changes, start up items, schedule tasks, services, and undo all the damage, as opposed to rebuilding. Rebuilding might be, reimaging might be faster. So because Sentinel-1 tracks every single action on the machine, network, disk, memory, CPU, and it happens at the kernel level, we're able to see things that you wouldn't normally see, which allows them to then log it, document it, provide the forensics on it, so that with a couple of clicks, you can actually remediate a machine back to a known good state. All Windows features. And so it's really, really efficient in an environment. It's far greater than your traditional antivirus solutions. A good description? Yeah, we assume everybody knows everything.
Yeah, we're security, so we know everything.
Yeah, you know everything.
That was a given, I think.
Do you have any thoughts on ThreatLocker?
Yes. So good company, good intent, administratively heavy. And so what ThreatLocker is that they provide the ability to, by default, block everything, and then intrinsically turn on approved apps. But it means every time a new patch, a new update, a new version of anything comes out, somebody has to check it and say, yes, this is allowed, no, it's not. And so they have a team that helps you do it, but it struggles at times. And they struggle, and partners and or businesses get challenged by, hey, how are we going to solve this issue? But in concept, it's a really good solution. They're not the first ones to do it. Carbon Black still does it in military and government installations. They've had, by default, blacklisting everything for forever. But if you have the team to be able to manage it, it's a good solution. It's not in place of EDR. Because if you allow Word to run, and the attack comes in from Word, they're not going to be able to take action. So it's not a one or the other, it's you run in parallel to help provide additional layers of defense. They also do a really good job of what they call ring fencing, where they can control data. Let's say maybe you've got users that you give permission to that can use Dropbox. You can allow and set thresholds as what they can and can't do with Dropbox. So can they log into their Dropbox from outside and connect? You can block those kinds of things. You can block a file being attached to a document, to an email. You can block printing if you want to get in depth with it. So from that perspective, it gives you some additional controls that you might not otherwise get. Again, I say the more the merrier, but if you put EDR with threat locker, you're probably in pretty good shape.
Is that fair?
Yeah, would agree.
Okay, so let's talk about compromise. I think that you've got a great story on this one.
Yeah, so I'm gonna share a personal story that actually doesn't have anything to do with cybersecurity, but I promise you at the end it will tie in to this last little exercise. This story starts back in the days whenever I could actually take vacation, which was some time ago. I haven't had one of those in a very long time. We had decided, my wife and I, to go to the beach because that's what you do on vacation, I'm told. I complained, as I do, but I'm in security, so I feel like that is a given. We decided that while we're on vacation, we're going to go snorkeling. I said my wife did, I objected, I lost. We get to the snorkeling place, we get on the boat, we head out to what I felt like was probably like in the middle of the ocean. Turns out it was probably just the end of like the bay area, but it felt like it was the ocean, and it was pretty deep. I had to put on this snorkel, goggles, these crazy flippers, a bunch of stuff that I was relatively sure was going to make me trip whenever I was getting off the boat. We get off the boat and we swim over to where the other instructor's at. And I can swim. Most of us here probably know how to swim, hopefully. I swim out there, I get all the way out there. And when I get out there, I can see nothing but water and the boat all around me. The boat's a long ways away. It's not like, not like a long ways, but like if I get tired, it's not close enough. And I begin to realize that I don't think I could like tread water for a long time out here. Like I don't know if I'm that strong of a swimmer. And around this time, the captain of the boat and the instructor says at least once a day, someone comes to this who doesn't do this very often, and either gets water in their snorkel or just panics and forgets they can swim and flails around in the ocean asking to kind of be safe. And he said, if that happens to you, please know that you can just stand up because it's a ground ball. I didn't know that at the time either. I felt like it was maybe talking to me, but it's probably something else. The reason I tell you that is because as we go into this last scenario, and as we talk about all these things we talked about tonight, it can be very daunting. It can be very tough to digest all this, and no matter how similarly prepared you can be for these things, when an event occurs, all that training can kind of go out the window. And much like the principal instructor had kind of told me there, just make sure that when this happens, remain calm, take a breath. In this case, if you feel like you're drowning, just stand up and take a breath. Continue on. Cooler heads will prevail. So for this last exercise, for the scenario, what I want everyone to kind of do is just use this for homework or feedback or otherwise. In this scenario, I want you guys to kind of close your eyes and visualize this. You're in your place of business, and someone comes to you, IT person, direct report, or otherwise someone who is working in IT or just an end user, and says, it's 8 a.m., all of our systems are offline, nothing is working, we believe it's ransomware or something, we don't know what to do. You're in this position, someone has just told you this. What is your next step? What do you do? Who do you call? And are you prepared to handle an event like that? I know we're probably getting close on time, so as you're thinking about that, we're going to get ready to do some Q&A. Sales over here is going to pass around a mic.
Got the mic, so.
But we do have a couple seconds to
Don't give it to Chelsea.
We do have a couple seconds to marinate on what would your next call be.
All right, we have a couple seconds to marinate what your next phone call with Dee. And I think that's the very important next step that Tyler's hitting home.
It doesn't even gotta be a phone call. This, when this event occurs, what's your next step? I mean, do you just decide I'm gonna grab my keys and head to the car and maybe look for another job, or do you have an instant response plan? Do you know it? Do you have it really available? What is your next action in that moment? Because even when we feel prepared and rehearsed for it, and we feel like we're confident in our strategies and solutions, when an event occurs, a lot of that goes out the window. Panic sets in. You can swim, but all of a sudden nothing makes sense. The world's upside down, and you feel like you can't swim and you're drowning. How do you kind of remain calm in that scenario? And who do you call? Who's your next step? Who do you go to next?
Love it. Things that we all need to be asking ourselves, and there's no right answer, but there needs to be an answer. It's like a fire drill, a tornado drill, anything else. Tabletop exercises, things that help our organizations understand that we have to practice these hard things. This wasn't planned, and I hate the microphone, but why am I?
But you picked it up.
I did, and I turned it on myself. But anyway, but those are the things that I think that in our market, we don't get to hear enough about these bad scenarios, even though they're happening all around us. And we do have to challenge ourselves, and we need to challenge ourselves, and please continue to do this if you haven't challenged your organization. It's how do we do the tornado drill, the fire drill, the things that we're all up against, and come up with a game plan, because if you don't have one, we even came up with a game plan in our own office several years ago where we had it, and then once we tried to do a simulated tornado drill, for instance, with cybersecurity tabletop, we decided that we all as a team needed to have it memorized, and we're like, no, we need to pull out the actual instructions that we put in place and our next steps, and we don't need to memorize this. We need to be able to be calm enough to pull this out and start looking at step 1, step 2. These are the people, these are the ones calling the shots, these are the champions. So that's our challenge, is figure out what happens, what is that tornado drill, how do you start practicing it so that when it actually happens, you can be that calm and collected individual and start to be more versed in it. Why you guys love it?
So we do a lot of tabletop exercises on a regular basis for us. We've got 3,000 colleagues. We're in 18 locations around the world. We've got to think about all the worst scenarios. But the first question that always comes up is, and you should be asking yourselves this and asking your leaders this, in the event of a cyber attack and everything is down, what do we have to have up first? What's the priority of bringing back your life? Remember, you're down 14 to 21 days, 66 days back to normal. What does your business leader want first? You guys know?
Communication to the outside world.
Communications to the outside world is 3.
Payroll.
Finance. Payroll. Ability to receive money, pay money, and meet payroll. Well, when I walked in, you're laughing, but when I walked into that courthouse where the county had been hit, the very first questions I asked them was not what happened or where is everything, it's when's your next payroll? And they looked at me like I was like Russian. I mean, like, why would you ask that question? Because you're not going to be up anytime soon. You're not going to be up anytime soon. And you're going to have staff, police officers, firefighters, your entire courthouse, judges, everybody that's going to want to get paid. When is it? This is on Tuesday. They said Friday. I said, okay, you guys don't work on your plan there. My recommendation is that you go ahead and prepare to pay them the exact same check they got last time, and be prepared to communicate that. You'll catch up, make corrections afterwards, but you have to have a plan in place. And again, their faces were ghost white. They couldn't believe that that's the very first thing, that the very first competition we had. I didn't know the county managers or those people, and they're just like, okay, we don't like you already, but we know that we're glad you're here. So finance is first, but the IT guy in me actually says I need to have internal operations up first. I have to have my infrastructure up. So my ability to restore from backups, my ability to provide forensic information, my ability to grab logs is going to have to be there. So finance is first. Your business operations, whatever your business does, is next. Then it's communications, ability to communicate outside the world so that you can communicate and transact. Then you're looking at your internal operations, getting those functioning back up, like if you're a manufacturer, you built this widget, and now we're going to sell this widget. Like that's got to all function next. And then last is going to be your marketing and sales. Now, if you have more than 5 departments, just stack rank them, right? Because you guys know this salespeople can work for any golf course, right?
They don't, that's what I can tell.
I'll walk around the mic for anybody's got questions, so.
Nice hustle.
So in that instance, would it be more of a higher priority to get up authentication, especially since a lot of us are tunneling it back through federated services, SAML, et cetera? Because, I mean, without our domain controllers, they're not getting into those finance systems. They're not getting into
That's why, yes, you can bring back your internal operations first, but your business leaders don't understand that. They don't know how you build the watch. They just know I got to be able to receive those checks, pay my bills, and be payroll. But we don't have the business. And that's why finance is first in their mind, because without those 3 things, you cease to function as a business.
You don't realize how important DNS is in that scenario until you don't have it, and you got to remember all your servers IP addresses by heart.
Yeah, documentation would be a really good thing to do in advance, right? Document everything so you know what those things are. The worst thing that you have to do is like, hey, we had a switch with all kinds of IP calculations and routes and controls, access control lists. We have no idea what they're doing now. Because we didn't document before this happened.
Well, the moment when you realize you have a configuration that's backed up to that, but it is not current, and that is a terrifying thought, sobering thought as well.
Yeah, or your SAN, your SAN connections back into the network. It's like, oh my gosh, did you actually document that? Do you actually know what was assigned to everything and how it's going to function? And how you're going to bring this back up in a clean network? Because you've got capacity, but you can't touch it because the rest of the network's being used for forensics. So how do we start segmenting off a new slice of data that I can start using to bring up a clean network? There's so much that goes into this that you would never think about until you looked at it from, if I had no network today and to start from scratch, how would I build this network back to production as quickly as possible? Because that's your job. Our job is to figure out what happened, make sure it doesn't happen again. Your job is to make sure they get back operational, right? Other questions?
So when it comes to ransomware, one of the things I continue to hear is backups, making sure that your backups are clean, making sure that you restore your backups and test them, etc. When I look at the hibernation period of most attacks, my question is how do you verify that your backups don't include the ransomware? And how do you get after a ransomware, even if you've done unencryption, whether you've paid the ransom or broken the encryption, that you're not restoring ransomware back and you get it clean?
So a good process as part of incident response includes testing before you bring those things back online. And you don't just bring everything back into once, you're bringing up a single domain controller, then you're bringing back the controllers, you're bringing up all the rest of the parts that you need to have to function network. And you're going to do it in a separate segment so that you're not separating that activity. The reality is that you might very well be bringing back the attack, but if the forensic team is doing their job, they figure out how it happened, and then you can go source that inside the server in the farm so that you can stop it happening. It's very common for attackers to leave scheduled scripts. Like I talked about insider attacks. We saw one where an engineer was leaving a business and he was very, very upset about compensation. And he installed a couple of scheduled tasks to launch ransomware 1, 2, and 3 months after he left.
Logic bomb.
Nobody ever thought to check his laptop. They literally assigned a new user to it and gave it out to him. And the new IT person's machine was the cause of the attack, but it was the previous user that did that. So there's a lot of things you do in that recovery process to make sure that you're not restoring the attack, that you don't fall victim again, because that's a really bad day. I think that's worse than it happened in the first place, is what happened the second time.
I think we're also starting to see some adoption there on the backup front where they're implementing antivirus and ransomware scanners to look at some of the content and backups to help with that. I mean, not all solutions are kind of created equal, but I think that's beginning to become more commonplace as well. It's not foolproof, but it is another way to help.
Some of the forensic tools that we use, and as we start to identify the problems, we can run the forensic tools on live data, live systems, to go hunting for those persistent threats, those unusual activities that we found in the network that your traditional AV might not see. So again, those tools will make their way down, so we'll all have access to them. They're just not affordable right now. If you'll spend $50,000 for a piece of software you can use 3 times. It's just not practical for most businesses to do that, unless they're in the middle of an incident. So you deal with those kinds of things. But that's part of the good IR team is going to help you solve that.
So I have a question regarding to like restoring from backups and stuff like that. I've been seeing a lot online, especially in forums, and especially with people that deal with cybersecurity and stuff like that, is that they recommend the backups for the data or your actual data, but restoring the servers, they recommend orchestration. So scripting it out, running it from a bare ISO and building it up using, config files and PowerShell scripts and whatever have you. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, they're trying to avoid the scenario that you just gave us, right? If I don't restore a machine, I just bring back the data, I'm not bringing back the attack with it. So that's a process, but tell me about the network first. Are we talking about a 25 user law firm? Are we talking about a 3,500 student school system with 8 schools and it's tied to the county government? I mean, there's so much more to that conversation on how you would restore, how you would recover per se, that have to be accounted for. And in your scenarios, when you're doing your tabletop exercises, when you're doing your incident response planning.
If I'm a small business with 1 or 2 servers, I'm probably not looking at investing in orchestration and technology like that. It's not going to be cost effective, right? So I mean, there's a solution at all types of scale or levels of scale.
What tool do you have to recommend for scanning large, vast amounts of backup data?
Try to stay away from naming tools, so I'm going to punt to Jay on that one.
I'm going to scan it before it ever gets to backups. I'm going to use my EDR. I'm going to use SIM to watch for that unusual activity coming out of that data source, because I need to understand what's happening there. And so I'm going to look at that a little bit differently. But in most enterprise spaces, there's not any one tool I know that's designed to scan backups specifically. So you're going to do it after you've recovered.
And let's be honest, large data sets are going to take a while to scan, no matter how good the tool is. It's going to be a challenge to do that. If you've got a very large volume or a large data set, that's going to take some considerable time to scan, and that's something that you're going to want to factor in, especially in an incident where you're going to recover potentially with a system that has a backup. Making sure that you're doing it on a regular basis, knowing how long it's going to take. Whenever you're looking to restore operations, that's going to be part of your calculation.
What's fascinating though, when you sparked that thing, the law firm that I talked about, when it came time to decrypt the data, it took 39 hours per terabyte. And they had 12 terabytes of data. And we literally took their physical servers, which were all running, VMware, running VMs, separate the disks out, turn them back into regular physical servers. So I had, 6 physical servers decrypted at the same time. And it still took us 10 days to get the data back.
Yikes.
I don't know about you guys. I don't have, not a lot of places have gateway internet. They're super fast. So, when we're talking, even cloud backups, which are great, you got to factor in. If you've got 12 terabytes, how long is it going to take you to pull that down to get that back into your environment as well?
I got time for 1 or 2 more. Don't worry, guys, I'm giving it to somebody else, not Chelsea.
I think I recognize this guy.
So I got one that might help kind of bring it all back together, because what my concern is, seeing the the cyber insurance carriers leaving the space, leaving us with just a few, seeing those non-negotiables, that list that used to be, do you have antivirus, yes or no? Now it's 4 pages, and if you answer wrong, now you get the 30 page, and if you answer wrong, now you get the 60 page. The rising premiums, the cost of security personnel and tools. What I'm concerned about is the opposite effect, that what we have to get that buy-in at the executive level. And like, that seems like a major delta right now, and I'm afraid they're gonna stop caring because it seems like insurmountable. They're gonna stop trying to get cyber insurance, they're gonna start abandoning best practice. So what's your thoughts on that?
Looking at it and saying my premiums are going up considerably, I need to implement MFA everywhere, and I have a pretty heavy investment here. Is it worth it to maintain cyber? I'm going to kind of hit it back to Jay here and say, what was the average cost of the breach?
$1 million.
So, I mean, when you look at how far that's going to take with your premiums and investment, that cost is pretty staggering. So it is definitely, in my opinion, worth that investment, because if that happens and you happen to be on the other side of that equation, I don't know about you guys, but I don't have $1 million in my pocket anywhere. So.
I think I'd go one step further and say, when you work on this policy and you work on it with your leaders, bring the attorneys in as well. Because not every insurance policy is created equal, right? We learned this in other policies. So you want to make sure that you understand what breach notification is and how it's covered, what that looks like. You want to know what crisis management looks like. You want to know if they have crisis coaches, or you want to know what the attorneys are they're bringing in. You want to have lots of information up front, and the insurance companies are happy to share that with you. But if you don't know what kind of questions to ask, I can look at 3 policies and can tell you the difference just by comparing them. I don't know what that means. So, get legal advice, get professional help, work with your agents to understand the differences in those policies, because they will be extremely valuable to your business when bad things happen. So, with that, to kind of wrap up and just say, whatever you do, start with your assessment. That's what the insurance company is doing. They're assessing your ability to respond, your ability to take action, to defend, to understand what the impact would be, the risk would be to your business. Cybersecurity is a team sport. I think about, who would you call first? I have to tell you, I'd probably call a bunch of people in this room. I'm guessing, I could be wrong, I'm not from here, but I'm guessing that if your business got hit by an attack and you didn't help, there's 3 or 4 people in this room that would probably come to your aid. Yep. Right? Is that a fair statement? Yep. It's no different than if there was a tornado came through. Your neighbors will help. You have the talent in the community. You have the resources with companies like Pearson-Kelly that will take action with you to help get you back up and running. Don't do it in a vacuum and try to figure it out yourself, because there's people in this room that have done it before that can help you avoid some of the pain and mistakes you'll make when bad things happen. But most importantly, again, go back and assess. Start there to understand what your risk is. That's the easiest conversation you'll have with your leadership, is when you can show them what the risk is and what the value is of the day that you would lose in a cyber attack.